But as we get a little more into this, we're going to move a little bit faster because it is by nature a survey type study rather than a verse by verse or in-depth kind of study. So we are in Genesis chapter 17, and we commented last week about it was at this point that Abram's name was changed to Abraham. And the name Abraham literally means father of multitudes or a father of nations. And so his name was changed. But it's sort of in the name change itself, it reiterates the promise that God had made, that Abraham was going to have just a huge number of descendants. But of course, that hadn't started yet. And he didn't have, Abraham and Sarah had no children yet. And so that was a sort of a point of concern. And remember last week we talked about Sarah, I sort of came up with an alternate scheme, and she gave her handmaid Hagar to Abram, and Ishmael was born. But he was not to be the son of promise. There was still to be a son born to Sarah. Now, God made a covenant with Abraham at this time with a specific sign of the covenant. In chapter 17, verse 9, God said to Abraham, "Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is the covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskins, and it shall be for a token of the covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man-child in your generations. He that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed, he that is born in thy house and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant." And so the ordinance of circumcision begins here. And we understand, of course, that continued on then. Now remember, in your chronology, obviously, this is way before the law of Moses is given, right? And so even before the law of Moses, the Abrahamic covenant included circumcision. And so it will come on into the law of Moses as an ordinance as well, but it began well before that. So again, a promise is made here that Abraham and Sarah are going to have a child. Verse 15, God said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear?" And Abraham said unto God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." And God said, "Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant with his seed after him." And so here's the promise to Abraham reiterated. But Abraham is old now. And by the time the child is born, he's going to be 100. Sarah's going to be 90. And that's just past the age of childbearing. This is a promise that's going to be fulfilled in a more than natural sort of way. God's going to bring about, it's going to be a natural childbirth, but it's going to be between Abraham and Sarah when they're past the normal age to have children. I got a question for you, and see what you think about this. In verse 17 that we just read, when Abraham heard this, he laughed. But there doesn't seem to be any rebuke for the laughing that he did about this. But when you get over to chapter, what did I write down here? The next chapter, 18. So the messengers come to Abraham. Turns out that they are messengers from God. And they're going to deliver some messages. And part of it, again, is this promise. Verse 18, verse 9. They said unto these messengers from God that had come to Abraham's house, they said to him, "Where is Sarah thy wife?" And he said, "Behold, in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child, which I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return to thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. So I'm asking you about the contrast between Abraham laughing and Sarah laughing. Sarah seems to be rebuked for her laughing, but it doesn't seem that Abraham was. Any thoughts on that? I mean, the same act. Wayne?
This may be after the fact that she denied it, whereas Abraham, of course, he wasn't really asked about it.
Yeah.
But it seems to be, the fact that she lied about it as well as lying.
So I think that too. I think in the case of Sarah, her laughing was a lack of faith. God can't do that. I can't have children. I'm way too old to have children. That can't possibly happen. And so her laughing was a manifestation of a lack of faith on her part. Whereas I wonder if Abraham's laughing was more of a laughing of rejoicing, maybe. Josh?
Yeah, I was going to say, the outward actions can be the same, but God can tell what's in people's hearts and minds, and so Abraham could laugh, and then God could be able to tell that his laughter was a little bit different than laughing like that's a joke, that's never going to happen, and it seems like that's Sarah's attitude.
I think that's it. I think that's the distinction. As we said, same outward act, but God knows the heart, and he knew the heart of Abraham versus the heart of Sarah, and Sarah's heart was a heart of denial. Eric?
Well, let's say outward laugh. What's laughed within herself?
Yeah.
Both of them did that.
Yeah.
On his face.
Well, yeah, but he laughed himself, I think.
So, well, even, so what does it say in chapter 17, verse 17? Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100. And then, over here it says that Sarah heard, verse 11, Sarah was, verse 12, Sarah laughed within herself, saying. So, I don't know, I hadn't really made that distinction, Eric, but the point of it is, I think she's, again, God knows the hearts, and I think she's manifesting, and he knows it, he knows her heart, she's manifesting a lack of faith that God could do that. And I believe that's the difference between the two of them. But again, it's going to come to pass, and the child born will be Isaac. And when you get over to chapter 21, just if you just want to skip ahead a minute to chapter 21, verse 1, the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. So Abraham and Isaac. So that finally a child of promise. The child of promise is born. And I think we've commented on this before. It would have taken a pretty significant act or attitude of faith for Abraham to wait and wait and wait. And he was willing to take alternatives. If we need to do something alternative to this, at one point he offered that maybe his head servant would serve as the ancestral line. God said, no, that's not going to happen. Then when Hagar bore Ishmael, well, this is not it either. It's coming. And so Abraham would have had to have faith to wait for the promise, which here has come. Okay, so in chapter 18, what this chapter is best known for is the coming destruction of Sodom. So these same messengers, there were three of them. Verse 2 says, 3 men came who were angels from God, messengers from God. And in verse 16, So Abraham hosted them and fed them and so forth. And in verse 16 of chapter 18, the men rose up from thence and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on their way. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. And the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is coming to me. And if not, I will know. And the men turned their faces from thence and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. So, God said, I'm not going to keep these plans from Abraham. You know, Abraham's a good man. I have all confidence. You know, that's a really amazing statement there in verse 19. I know him. The Lord said, I know him. He will command his children, his household after him. They shall keep the way of the Lord. So, this is the kind of confidence that God had in Abraham. And so he reveals to him what his plan is. He's going down, these messengers from God are going to go to Sodom and see the situation, and then the judgment, the indication of certain judgment is there, because in verse 23, Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure, if there be 50 righteous within the city, wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? And in verse 26, the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. So, you know this story, that Abraham didn't stop there. He got him to agree, if there's 50 good people in Sodom, would you spare the city if there would happen to be 50 righteous people there? God said, I would spare the city if there's 50 righteous people. Well, Abraham didn't stop there. He said, well, what if there were 45, just almost 50, what about 45? God's okay, 45. Well, what about 40? Would you spare the city if there's 40? Yeah, okay, 40. Well, what about 30? Yes, okay, 30. What about 20? I got to tell you, I've always been amazed that Abraham would engage in this negotiation with God. He gets him down to 20, and he gets him down to 10. He gets him down to 10, and God says, okay, I will agree to 10. It says, it's right at the end of the chapter, end of 32, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. And the Lord went his way after he had finished communing with Abraham. So he got him down to 10, and the Lord didn't wait around for any further negotiations than that. You know, that's pretty amazing if you stop to think about it, because Sodom, by all indications, was a mighty city, a large city. And, you know, I think Abraham knows. God definitely knows, but you got to think that Abraham probably knows it's going to be a difficult thing to find 10 people there, I imagine. Wayne?
Yeah, that would include Lot.
Yeah.
There include Lot and his family.
Yeah. And so, you know, he got him way down, but I think he still knows he got a big job in his hand to find 10 righteous people. So the question is asked, what was the sin of Sodom? Now, we've read several times that the men of Sodom were very wicked, exceedingly wicked, incredibly wicked, but their specific sin hasn't been fully identified yet, but it's definitely made clear here in chapter 19. So it says, there came 2 angels to Sodom at even. So there were 3 men that came to Abraham, but 2 enter into Sodom. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground and said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go your ways. And they said, no, we will abide in the street all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned into him, and entered into his house, and he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they were laid down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said to him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out to us that we may know them. And Lot went out the door and shut the door after him and said, I pray you, brother, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have 2 daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out to you, and do you to them as is good in your eyes, only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, stand back. And they said again, this one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now we will deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So here, there's no doubt that the sin of Sodom is homosexuality, right? So the men of Sodom came. They knew that Lot had invited these 2 men who were strangers who'd come in. They knew that he invited them into his house, and they were there. And they came there and said, bring these men out that we may know them. And that's just a very delicate way of suggesting they wanted to have intimate relations with him. Sometimes we would refer to this as carnal knowledge. We want to know them. We want to have carnal knowledge, is what they're saying. Several years ago, studying with this question of homosexuality, and some people who were sympathetic to homosexuality said that the sin of Sodom wasn't, they weren't being condemned for homosexuality. They were being condemned for inhospitality. In other words, the problem here is that they were just being rude and mean to these strangers. And they just weren't being kind and hospitable. And that's what their sin was. But actually the text says otherwise. If you want to take that at face value, they said, no, bring them out. We want to know them. If that's not talking about, intimate knowledge, we want to be friendly. We want to get to know them. That argument doesn't work any way you twist it around. They clearly were homosexuals, and that was their sin. And what do you think? I'm sure we've talked about this before. What do you think in verse 8 about Lot offering his 2 virgin daughters to these men? I don't want you to harm these men who come under the shelter of my roof. Here, I have 2 virgin daughters. Take them. Do with them as you will, but don't hurt these men. What do you think of that? The question that comes up is, what father would ever imagine to do such a thing? Why would he think to offer his daughters to these horrible, wicked, immoral men? Why would he do that? Kelly? I think so. Yeah, I think that's it. I think he's just shaming them. I don't think he imagined that they would take that offer at all, but he was making the offer with the idea that maybe they'll be ashamed and leave and drop all of this. But they weren't. In fact, they were so just completely tore up in this whole situation that I've always thought that was amazing in verse 11. They were struck with blindness, but they kept trying to get in the door. Don't you think if you say, wait a minute, I can't see anything. I'm blind. I've lost my eyesight. I got to go home and get some help. No, they kept wearying themselves at the door to see if they could get in and get at these men. That's how absolutely committed to this that they were. Thoughts or comments, anybody? All right, so I think, for all of those who would try to justify homosexuality and even deny that was the sin of Sodom, this text certainly destroys that argument, right? And so the punishment comes. I asked you in the study questions who escaped. And of course it was Lot and his wife and 2 daughters. So the men, these men from God, these messengers from God, verse 12, the men said to Lot, hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, thy sons, thy daughters, whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. Now there's some difference here in translation, and I don't know what version you might be reading. The way the King James words it, it sounds like that he had married some married daughters. We already read that he had 2 virgin daughters, but the King James reading of this talks about sons-in-law which married, past tense, his daughters. But some newer translations make it sound like these were men who were sort of betrothed or engaged to be married to his daughters. I've never been able to really discern which is the best way to go there. Any thoughts on that? So, is somebody got a newer translation, Wayne?
Yeah, it says literally like one who was jesting.
Yeah, they thought he was joking.
So, yeah, but it does have something wrong.
Yeah. Josh?
Say to the notion that the sin of Sodom wasn't homosexuality. Jude verse 7 says, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire.
Exactly right.
So yeah, Jude talked about it. It's no doubt that it's homosexuality.
Exactly right. So now we know how this story goes. They're told to leave the city. The men send Lot and his wife and 2 daughters. They leave the city. So Lot wants to go to a nearby city, a small village apparently. In verse 21, he says, I have accepted thee concerning this thing. I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. This is one of the messengers. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. So they send Lot out. Lot asks and is given permission to go to this village of Zoar. But in verse 24, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. He overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew on the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Back up in verse 17, they were told, escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And when they said escape to the mountain, Lot said, well, can I go over to this little village of Zoar? They said, okay, but go, and don't look back. And of course, famously, Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. This geographical area of Sodom and Gomorrah is in the Jordan River Basin, around what would be the west and southwestern part of the Dead Sea. Did you ever hear anybody say the reason why the Dead Sea is a salt sea is because Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt, and that's what made the Dead Sea a salt sea? I've actually heard people try to make that argument. If Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, as she did, obviously the text says she did, that much salt would not make the Dead Sea a salt sea. The reason the Dead Sea is a salt sea is because it's like 900 feet below sea level. It's a very, very low place in the earth, and the water there is salty, very salty, in fact. It's not because Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. But we believe that she did, obviously. We definitely believe that she did. And of course, that in the New Testament, we're given the warning, remember Lot's wife. Do what you're told to do, and remember that God punishes those who don't do what you're supposed to do. Remember Lot's wife. And there is a lesson to learn there. Anybody, thoughts or comments? Yeah, Lynn.
Why do you think Lot didn't go back to Abraham?
I don't know. So the question is that why wouldn't he say, Abraham's doing okay. He's always been a good man. He's been I hadn't even thought about it. You've got to think at this point, this would have been, this whole business surrounding the coming of these visitors, the pronouncement of judgment upon the city, get out so that you won't be destroyed with the city. You got to think this was an incredibly traumatic time. So I think he probably wasn't thinking very wisely at this point. The end of the story about Lot is that, so now he's afraid to go to Zoar. And so he does go up into the mountains. You know, he initially said, I don't want to go to the mountains. Let me go to Zoar. And so the angel said, you can go to Zoar, but go. Well, now, after all this destruction has come upon Sodom and Gomorrah, and his wife has died in the process, he won't even go into Zoar. He's afraid now to be in Zoar. So he does go into the mountains and in a cave, it says in verse 30. So the two virgin daughters say, well, now, you know, our father doesn't have any seed, any descendants, and we need to remedy that. So they take it upon themselves to remedy the fact that Lot doesn't have any descendants left. And so they get him drunk. The first night, the one daughter has relations with him and she conceives. The second night, the other daughter has relations with him and conceives. And so the descendants that resulted from that incestuous episode right there in Lot's situation, the firstborn bare, verse 37, the firstborn bare a son and called his name Moab, the same as the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bare a son and called his name Ben-Ammi, the same as the father of Ammon unto this day. Well, in our Old Testament readings and in the history of Israel, the nation of Israel, some of their perpetual enemies were the Moabites and the Ammonites. And this is where they had their beginning points. So we'll try to remember that the Moabites and the Ammonites were descendants of Lot. All right? Thoughts or comments on any of this? You know, this is really an ugly part of the history here, isn't it? Remember the point we were making a couple of weeks ago? If men were writing this story on their own, uninspired men going to write this story, the history of Abraham and his descendants and the beginnings of the nation of Israel, that's ugly stuff. That stuff about Lot, his wife, his daughters, the incest. I'm not going to put that in there. I want the people in my story to be great and strong, supermen and superwomen. You know, that's the way a man would write it, but that's not the way this is written. And we've always said that the inclusion of these kinds of sort of ugly details indicate that this wasn't the product of man working his own imagination. This is almost certainly. I regard this as sort of a backdoor or subtle sign of inspiration. Anybody else here? Anything? All right. Well, as we move on then, and again, I want us to try to move a little bit faster if we can, without reading so much of all the chapters. Chapter 21, we'll just kind of summarize the chapters here for a minute. In chapter 1, so Ishmael is older by many years, and as Isaac is coming up there in chapter 21, there seems to be some sibling rivalry or some animosity between Ishmael and Isaac. And Sarah insists that Hagar and Ishmael be cast out, and they were. But God cared for them and renewed the promise to Hagar about Ishmael will become the father of a great nation. And so that's in chapter 22. in 21. In 22, we have another well-known episode in the life of Abraham. It says in chapter 22, it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here am I. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went to the place which God had said. Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire from his hand and the knife, and they went both of them. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering? So, a couple things here. What about, I'm reading the King James Version. It says that God did tempt Abraham. Well, over in the New Testament, in the book of James, in James chapter 1, verse 13, Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. Have we got a contradiction here? It says that God tempted Abraham, but James says God doesn't tempt anybody. How are you going to explain that to anybody? A little help here. Wayne?
Yeah, he did not test or tempt him to do evil, as was James reported. God was not tempted with evil, nor does he tempt any man to do evil.
Yeah.
He was testing Abraham's faith.
Yeah.
Sure. I think probably for Abraham's benefit.
Yeah, and lots of newer translations actually use that word rather than tempted. They use the word tested. He certainly didn't tempt him with evil, but he tested him to see if he would be obedient, and he was. And you know, in Hebrews chapter 11, that's mentioned as one of the great acts of faith on the part of Abraham. And in Hebrews 11, verse 17, it says, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now notice, here was Abraham's thinking process. We didn't know this. In Genesis, it's not revealed, but here in Hebrews 11, verse 19, he accounted that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. In other words, Abraham said, the fact that Isaac was even born shouldn't have happened. And if God could cause that to happen, then I'm going to offer him like God said, and God can raise him up again. He just has that kind of faith. And so Abraham certainly passed the test there. But I do think it's worth noting that this is not to be tempted with evil. God doesn't tempt with evil. And he wasn't tempting him. He didn't have a sinful opportunity in front of him. Again, James 1:13, God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man, I think, implied with evil. And so that's an important distinction to make there. And if you don't have it noted in your margin, you might circle the word. If you're reading King James as I am, you might circle the word tempt and pencil in the margin test, because and most newer versions will even translate it that way. All right. So that's in chapter 22. Let's hurry on. Let's go all the way to at the end of chapter 23, Sarah dies, and Abraham buys a burying place for her. Verse 17, the field of this is chapter 23, verse 17, the field of Ephron, which was in Machpelah, which was before Mamre, the field and the cave which was therein, and all the trees that were in the field, and the borders round about them were made sure. Abraham for a possession in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of the city. And after this, Abram buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which is the same as Hebron, in the land of Canaan. The field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abram for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. And so Sarah dies there. In chapter 24, so Abraham's getting old now. Isaac is the son of promise. The promise is that Abraham's descendants are going to be blessed through Isaac, right? But Abraham is concerned about who Isaac will marry. So he calls his servant, verse 2, 24:2, Abram said unto his eldest servant of his house that ruled over all that he had, Put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but thou shalt go into my country, to my kindred, and take a wife for my son Isaac. And so he doesn't send Isaac back. Now remember, so we didn't get a map out again here, but so we're going to go from the land of Canaan up over the Fertile Crescent, down the Euphrates River Valley area, back to Abraham's homeland. Take a woman to be the wife of Isaac from my kindred. Don't let him marry somebody from over here among the Canaanites. I don't understand this, but I guess it was a sign in those days among those people. Put your hand under my thigh and make this promise. We do. I guess, put your hand, when you're in a court of law and you have to take an oath or something, or when they swear in a president or chief justice of the Supreme Court, you put your hand on a Bible. Well, that's just, those are just cultural practices which sort of emphasize the fact, this is the truth. I promise this is the way it's going to be. And so his servant is sent back. A long story and a lot of repetition in this chapter about him going. He meets Rebekah at a well. She's come out to water her father's flocks. And he meets Rebekah, and then he negotiates, this servant negotiates with Rebekah's father. So it turns out that Rebekah is a descendant of a relative of his mother's. Rebekah's father is Laban. Have I got this right? Help me out, somebody. They're related. Are they Laban and Sarah? I want to say they were cousins, but I'm not sure if that's right. Somebody help me out on that. I should have looked that up. I don't remember how that is exactly. Am I right on that? Laban is Sarah's brother? Huh? Rebekah and Laban. Now,
It says, I am the daughter of Bethuel.
say again.
It says, I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah.
Oh, Laban is Rebekah's brother. But that's not her. I was trying to make Laban her father. That's not her father. That's where I was off. Her father's name was, what was it? You had it, Karen. What was it? Bethuel. Bethuel is the father. And he's father of Laban and Rebekah. And so that's the connection there, Laban and Rebekah. Okay. All right. So anyway, the arrangement is made, and she's allowed to go. She agrees to go. She's allowed to go. And when you get all the way to the end of chapter 24, then Rebekah rose, verse 61, and her damsels, they rode upon camels and followed after the man. And the servant took Rebekah and went his way. And Isaac came from afar, came from the way of the well of the Lahairoi, for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes when she saw Isaac, and she lighted off the camel, for she had said unto the servant, What man is this that walketh in the field to meet us? And the servant had said, It is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that had happened. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So the question is sometimes asked about how this turned. I mean, they ended up being husband and wife, but it doesn't seem too formal or too proper here in the way that was finalized. And we would just point out this apparently was the cultural norm. This is the way it was done. This is how you formalized a wedding or a marriage in those times. And so there's not anything improper about this, although to our Western mind it might read that way, but it wasn't. All right, chapter 26, several more details about in chapter 25. So it's kind of interesting. Sarah had been barren for a long time. Now Rebekah is barren for a long time. This is chapter 25, verse 20. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padanaram, and sister to Laban, the Syrian. There's that relationship we were questioning a minute ago. Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren. The Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels, and the one people shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. So she brings forth twins. To the young kids, when we have our Bible class, we say, what about these twins? They were twins that didn't look alike. So they weren't identical twins. They were fraternal twins, Jacob and Esau. But the prophecy is made before they are born that the younger, who was Jacob, will serve the elder, who was Esau. And that's not the way that's not what would typically be the case, right? The firstborn, Esau, even though they're twins, even though they're born in almost immediately the same time, there's one who was born first. And the one who was born first was Esau, and he would have typically received the birthright and the blessing of the firstborn. But we're going to read how that didn't happen, of course, and Jacob becomes the one through whom the lineage will progress. The elder will serve the younger, prophecy made even before they are born. Now, it says in verse 27, the boys grew, and Esau was a cunning hunter, a man of the field, and Jacob was a plain man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he did eat of his venison, but Rebekah loved Jacob. And Jacob sowed pottage, and Esau came in from the field, and he was faint. And Esau said to Jacob, Feed me, I pray thee, of that same red pottage, for I am faint. Therefore was his name called Edom. He's going to be the father of the Edomites, another nation, right? And Jacob said, Sell me this day thy birthright. And Esau said, Behold, I am at the point to die, and what profit shall the birthright do to me? And Jacob said, Swear to me this day. And he swore unto him, and he sold his birthright unto Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, and he did eat and drink, and rose up and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So there's 2 things here, and we're just out of time. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this as we begin next week. There are 2 separate things here. There's the birthright and the blessing. The birthright was in regards to material inheritance. And the birthright would be that the eldest gets a double portion of the inheritance. So in this case, where there's only 2 heirs to Isaac, then Esau would get 2 parts, and Esau would have gotten 2 parts, and Esau won, or Jacob rather won. Esau would have gotten 2 parts, Jacob would have gotten 1 in the birthright arrangement. But in this case, Esau didn't even care. He had no regard for his birthright. And so he sold his birthright for a bowl of soup, as we often say. Now, in the next chapter, well, a couple chapters removed, we're going to see how Jacob ended up getting the blessing as well. But so we'll make that distinction between birthright and blessing. All right, we're out of time. As I said, we're going to try to move a little bit quicker through this history. But boy, there's so many stories here to learn from. Thanks, everybody.